Okay, welcome back, Tennessee Valley this morning.
Phone last time.
Well, and Julie, and not to mention, Julie just left. I called her Kathy on her way out. So I don't know what's going on. I'm throwing phones, calling people by, and we're sitting here with Ron Moore. Now. Ron wishes he looked this good.
I shaved my mustache this morning.
This is, of course, Ron Moore's better half. This is Debbie Moore, the brains of the family. Kim was right there, but just in that family.
It happens to all of us, doesn't it?
That's right.
We just have to.
But Debbie is joining us this morning in place of Ron because she is going to impart on us some great history about this community, as Ron does each and every Wednesday. This Wednesday, no exception with Debbie. Of course, I don't know what we're going to talk about. Usually he kind of tells us when he walks in, so it's a surprise.
Well,
we
had cat-mittens on the side.
We did have cat-mittens.
You get distracted.
We have been playing with those adorable kittens. I
are
hope someone adopts
I
them.
do too.
I want to talk about a book I'm writing.
Okay,
good for
wonderful.
Well, I do a lot of different kinds of research, and over the course of time, I started doing a little bit in the Civil War. I have never really been, a scholar of the Civil War, and I started to notice that the victor's side of the story is well written, but very little is written about the Confederate side of the story. So I'm writing a book called Confederate Voices.
Wow.
Okay.
And I have found some great research. In the 1920s, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, here and other places, and I think just across the state of Tennessee, started interviewing the Civil War soldiers, or they were writing the stories that their father had always told them, or they were just interviewing different people about what actually happened. And some of the most fascinating stories are written about this area. You have to understand that during the whole Civil War, this area was occupied by either the Confederates or the Union for the whole 4 years.
Right.
Okay.
And it was a very difficult time, and especially for the Confederate folks. But the women were all left here, and they had all these different soldiers coming through and taking their food, and a lot of the stories that are written are those stories. So I'm compiling those stories of the ladies that were left here to fend for themselves.
Absolutely.
The stories of the soldiers, there's several diaries from this area that have been written. There's some very interesting applications for pensions, and one of those comes from a fellow up in Calhoun, Tennessee, and his name was Jonathan Returns Megs Only.
Oh, that's so funny. We had that guy named Return or whatever.
Right.
That was a lot of their middle names for whatever reason.
Well, and there was a famous guy named Return Megs, and as an honor, people would name him. But this guy ended up with everybody's name. And he was quite the character.
I bet.
We think that he built Cumberland Presbyterian Church in Charleston, probably when he was 18 or 19 years old. He says that he designed it and helped build it. And he was a builder, a painter, a lawyer, and an exaggerator, I think.
Probably.
Because he filled out the applications for many of these Civil War pensions after the war, and most people's applications were usually 4 pages long. Well, the ones he'd fill out would be 8 pages long, because he would include their information, and then he would include all the information that he knew about that topic. Well, his application happened to be 62 pages long.
Well, there you go.
And it's more like a diary. And I found it so amusing because when you read it, you think that he fought the war by himself. And
that's a Joe Palo syndrome.
Yes. I believe a few men have that syndrome. But it's just really comical for the general to notice that he was the most worthy to carry a note through the enemy lines. He did end up in prison, which was it's very interesting. At some point in time, his pants were nothing but a waistband with the pockets still in it. And he said, well, at least I have my pockets, So
something to be said for that.
But the funny thing is it was obvious that he had served. It's obvious that he had been a prisoner of war. He had served the full term, came back, but his pension was denied. And I really don't know why, but I think it's probably because he had pestered the people over at the pension board so much. He actually says in this pension application that he had rewritten Dixie because he didn't like the way it was written, and he had sent them a copy of that too, and how I wish I could have found that copy but that's the kind of stories that I'm putting together.
That's neat.
One of my favorite stories is about one of the Mrs. Hardwicks. And she was living out where Fletcher Park is now. That's where her home was. And I think that the old spring house out there was actually her spring house. Okay. I would really like to prove that, because that would really get it on the registry. We know it's the right age. Right. But the story goes that the Union, she was quite the Confederate Southern lady. And the Union troops were out there in that area guarding the road. And they went into her spring house. And they drank all the buttermilk that they wanted. They drank all the milk that they wanted. And then they poured the rest out on the ground, which really upset her. So she said something to them. And so they took her butter out of the spring house, and they set up a target, and they were tossing her butter at that target. And so she just went back to her house. So when they left, she went down to the spring house and picked the butter up off the ground, went to her house and made gingerbread cookies with them, and then
gave it to them.
Went across the hill. She didn't give it to them. She sold them the cookies. That's one of my favorite stories.
Absolutely.
And I'm so glad that someone had the insight to know that you want to write down the story of the common people.
Right.
And we had women in Cleveland and Bradley County that actually went to prison during the Civil War for being Confederate supporters and refusing to take the Pledge of the Allegiance to the Union. And so they actually went to prison. Matter of fact, one lady went to prison with a baby in her arms.
Oh my
goodness. She was forced to be some sort of teacher there. Eventually the baby became ill and died, and she wrote a letter to President Lincoln and said, is this the kind of union that you want to have, where a woman with a child is sent to prison? And he sent back word for her to be released. Not only did he want her to be released, she was taken to wherever her husband was serving so that she could see him, and then she was brought back to Cleveland. But there were actually limits inside town that you couldn't go past, and women who crossed over those lines were put in jail. And then if they just wouldn't behave, they were sent to prison. But we had women.
Now, Joe's all for that.
I'm all for that. I wish they had that today.
We can come back and talk more about these women.
Yeah, let's do that, because we've got some interesting
more about
stuff.
These women. That's right, because we've got to figure out how we can reverse that whole situation.
No, we got to figure out how we can bring that back again. Any case, we're going to be back with more Tennessee Valley This Morning. Debbie Moore, and of course this story we're talking about in the book that she's writing. We'll tell you more about that. We'll have our weather forecast when we come back as well, so you can see what today's going to hold for you. We'll be back with more right after this. Stay tuned.
How would you like to look and feel better? If so, then visit the Ford Center for Anti-Aging, located at 2020 Key Street Northwest. Dr. Ford has been serving Cleveland and the surrounding area since 1984. He is a licensed physician with the Board of Anti-Aging Medicine, offering affordable Botox injections. Botox is a medication that is used to treat dynamic wrinkles such as crow's feet, forehead lines, and frown lines. In addition to Botox therapy, rejuvenate and smooth wrinkled skin. The micro-laser peel treats skin conditions associated with aging and active lifestyles. If you're looking for safe and affordable anti-aging treatment, call the Ford Center for Anti-Aging at 423-614-0535, located at 2020 Key Street Northwest.
I'm Byron Winters with Landmark Insurance Brokerage. Contact me for all of your business insurance needs. From general liability to workers' comp, commercial auto, and business umbrellas, Landmark Insurance has you covered.
Kyle Dodge Chrysler Jeep, located at 511 South Lee Highway in Cleveland, is your #1 Dodge, Chrysler, and Jeep dealer in this area. Stop by and see the brand new 2011 Chrysler 200. The 200 is essentially a new nameplate with a significant facelift to the outgoing 2010 Chrysler Sebring. A beautiful vehicle at an unbeatable price. And while you're there, check out the all-new Jeep Grand Cherokee and the newly designed Dodge Durango. Redesigned, revamped, and reinvigorated. Yes, the Dodge Durango is back, bigger and better than ever. Kyle Dodge Chrysler Jeep offers a complete parts and service department with qualified service technicians to fix and repair your vehicle. So for your next brand new or pre-owned vehicle, make it Kyle Dodge Chrysler Jeep, located at 511 South Lee Highway in Cleveland.
I'm Dr. James Markham, host of the television program Heart of Health, seen right here on WTNB television. Thursday at 7 o'clock, Friday at 8 a.m. or Sunday at 3:30 p.m.
Hi, I'm Joe Jingle.
And I'm Kim Christmas.
We're here to tell you that the annual Cleveland Christmas Parade brought to you by Main Street Cleveland is back. It's going to be great with all the lights, floats, and Christmas cheer.
Don't forget, WTMB will be broadcasting live the entire parade from the parade.
I was going to get there before you interrupted me. Why are you always trying to interrupt me? I'm trying to tell everybody the Cleveland Christmas Parade is going to be live the night of the parade, the best production ever of the parade, right here on WTMB. You're always trying to steal the spotlight from me. What are you doing? Kim? Ah!
Welcome back to Tennessee Valley this morning. Real quick, before we talk more with Debbie Moore, you just saw a little commercial there, promo for the Christmas parade. Don't forget, it's Saturday, 6 o'clock downtown. But we want to thank our friend BJ, BJ's Clowns, located on Peerless Road, for the use of the costumes. Of course, you saw the little elf guy, that little guy, I don't know who that was, and then Santa, it looked like Mrs. Claus without a beard. But the costumes there, of course, BJ Clowns and More, located at 3103 Peerless Road. Her phone number, 473-9908.
And she has everything for all of your holiday needs.
All of it.
I mean,
well, especially now at Christmas. Now, what I'm going to tell you, of course, you can rent the Santa Claus and elf costumes and Mrs. Claus. But for the holidays, she is also providing Santa Claus and an elf and Rudolph to make an appearance at your particular party or event, or to show up at your home on Christmas Eve, yes, Christmas Day. They will show up. If you have a Christmas party, whether it be a party for your church, a party for your business, they will show up for that as well. So you need to give her a call. They've got, of course, as Kim said, all the different costumes you could ever want. And they do make personal appearances.
I think they also do karaoke, don't they?
I think they do karaoke.
They're party
too.
planners. So if you're having a party
and a lot of fun,
you
they
want
are.
help planning it or dressing up or just, somebody showing up.
Somebody showing up dressed up.
Don't do that.
I'll do that. I mean, you can call me. But 473-9908.
He's not wearing my shoes this time.
BJ's Clowns and More. It's a great lady, great place. And again, give her a call, 473-9908. Thank you for the use of the costumes. Okay. Now we're back with Debbie Moore, and we're talking about this book. We're looking at the Confederate side of the Civil War. You come across from the Union perspective. Now we're going to the Confederate perspective in the book you're writing. Tell us some more of the interesting stories you've run across in
this was a really interesting place to live during the Civil War because we did have people both from the Union and the Confederacy, sometimes brothers, which is really a strange thing. And then we had folks who fought for one side, and then they switched over.
Go to the other.
No, I like the way this one, operates better. So it was just a really unusual place to be during the Civil War, and I'll tell you how perplexed that is, or whatever word I want to use there. Down in the middle of downtown, close to what's now Johnston Park, there was some old beautiful homes there on that square, and some soldiers were going through, and the rear guard is shot from his horse. He's a Union soldier, and he's lying in the street, obviously wounded badly. And another Mrs. Hardwick, who lived right there on one of those corners, saw this young man fall from his horse and thought there's some other mother's son.
Right.
And she and her daughters and one of the slaves went out into the street and took that young man to their home. They kept him there for 3 days, and he died. They took him to the top of Fort Hill and buried him in the Confederate cemetery, with him being a Union officer. And there's another Union officer buried in the Confederate section of our Fort Hill Cemetery, and his last name is Dickerson. And we don't really know how and why he ended up there. His story's been lost. But Fort Dickerson in Knoxville was named after him. I mean, he was that big of a commander, and for him to be buried in the Confederate part of the cemetery, I think is quite interesting. We have a lot of people who are not from here buried in that section of the cemetery because we were on the main railroad line, and when battles were going on, like in Perryville, and lots of our soldiers, the Confederate soldiers, were wounded or killed, they were loaded onto trains and they were brought back south to a Confederate-friendly town. And for the first few years, or the first year and a half of the war, this was a Confederate-friendly town. And so they were taken to our hospitals, one which was the institute in town, and a lot of the churches. And that when they passed on, they were taken to Fort Hill and buried up there.
No kidding.
And they had wooden headboard,
Tombstones.
tombstones that were maintained for years. You know, they were painted or whatever. Some of them had names on them, I understand. But of course, over the course of history,
Sure.
those were lost. So we think we have 282 soldiers buried in that section. If you ever go to our beautiful historic cemetery, you'll see a big, beautiful lawn up there. And we're sure that's full of unknown soldiers. 33 of those soldiers were from a train wreck that happened between Bradley County and Ottawa. There had been a lot of rain and it had washed out from under the tracks, and I understand that there was a train wreck. And those 33 soldiers have all been identified. We don't know their exact spots, but about 20 years ago, a monument was placed up there that has all the names on it. We have a few soldiers from a train wreck down in the Black Fox community, and the rest of them came from the hospitals. And also, a little bit more property was bought after the war, and indigent Confederate soldiers and their wives were buried there, but the records weren't very well kept.
Right.
And so our very last soldier buried there from the Civil War was F.M. Gibson, and he was from North Carolina. Came here later on in life, and he was just 15 years old when he joined. His family, his mom was a widow, and when she died, he was all alone. And so the Confederate soldiers just kind of took him in, and he actually fought in battles at the age of 15. And he died here in 1939, and he was the last soldier laid to rest in our Confederate area of the cemetery. That is so significant that we're in the processes now of filling out the paperwork for the Registry of Historic Places, and we're going to put the older part of the cemetery on that, and I don't think we'll have any problem whatsoever getting it on there.
You know what I think is great, Debbie, is that when you look at it, of course, I mean, I was born up north, born in New York, and from that part, but you look at the Civil War and you can see how far back Southern hospitality went, because here are Southerners. Now, they weren't involved in if they were involved in the war, naturally they're shooting at the Union soldiers, but the people that were not involved in the war that lived in the South, when there was a need, and maybe needed to be met with a Union soldier being hurt or injured, they took care of them. They didn't just say, look, you're the enemy, you know. And so that Southern hospitality, and I wonder today how many, of course you talked about all these Union soldiers buried here. Back in the day, I'm sure that probably didn't fly well with the Union people thinking, you know, wait a minute, they're burying our guys there in the South. But in the scheme of things, they probably took really good care of these guys. And truth be known, probably maybe better care in some cases because of how it was here in the South.
That young man that Mrs. Hardwick took in and took care of, they put a sign up with his name on it, and his childhood friend came walking by from Ohio, came walking by, saw it, discovered the story, and made sure his family knew. And I believe his parents actually came here and thanked her. Really? And during the war, she was criticized for doing that, but she knew it was the right thing to do.
Some places in the South, I mean, we had that hospitality, but them are fighting words. In some places in the South, some people would have been lynched up and strung up, you know, over certain things.
And later
it was rough
on
down here, but the mothers, I think, are the ones that had the most tender of hearts, because they saw these young boys, you know, and they were very young, that 15-year-old. So many were very young that fought, and the moms were really torn, because so many times, like you said before, it was brother against brother. And how, you know, and I was just thinking, I mean, with my two boys, I mean, that would just be heart-wrenching to have them on either side of the nation, you know, divided over,
Which
you know,
one
different
would you
things.
pick?
Let's don't start another war, guys.
I would go with the one with the most bullets.
Yeah, there you go.
Just, you know, which one of you? Okay.
But, you know, that would be very difficult. And I've heard several different stories of even them having to bury them on their property, because if they were to tell that they even had a Union soldier in their home, that they would have been very, very very persecuted.
It got so serious here sometimes that
you can talk about Southern hospitality, but they were mean.
Well, they were digging people up out of cemeteries
That's
and
right.
taking them over to a more Confederate
That's
cemetery.
right.
But one of the reasons too that we feel like we have so few of our old homemade quilts from the Civil War, there was nothing here to build coffins with, and the women were bringing their homemade quilts and wrapping these soldiers in them to bury them. And so it was just the most difficult of times.
Now, do we know it on a reverse? Do we have Union mothers in some of the states that were
I'm sure
supported did the same thing? I'm sure so too.
There was just it was more conflicted in this area and down into the South that most of the war took place. I mean, there was some, don't get me wrong, but the majority and the Confederates were nowhere near funded like the Union as far as that. I mean, they were in tatters. I mean, they didn't.
Well, the government supported the
right. That's what I'm saying, and they were a band of of put together, and but it was a rough time. I don't know that I would have gone out. Well, West hadn't really started.
Well, most Confederate soldiers had to make their own uniforms, didn't they? They had to.
You had to provide your own uniform.
Yes.
Well, and there's something too that that I have found very odd in this research, and especially out of the diaries that came out of all the battles around Chattanooga. They said that they would shoot at each other all day, and at the evening they would go to where the lines were close to, and they would trade tobacco, and they would talk to the people that they knew from their communities and stuff. They would have lodge meetings, and people that were members of that lodge would come from both sides in and sit together, but then tomorrow morning we're going to shoot at you.
And tomorrow I'll be shooting at you, all right?
That's right, they were fighting war.
And there's wonderful stories about down in when they were up on the sides of the mountains down at Missionary Ridge. Well, the Confederate soldiers would start playing Dixie, and they played Dixie, and when they were finished, well, the Union soldiers would play Yankee Doodle or something, and then occasionally they would play, someone would start some song about Home Sweet Home or something, and they would all join in and play it. So it was kind of a really, I think it was, they were torn in their own hearts.
Right.
I think some of them were. But then again, there were some of the folks that I've been reading about for my book that to the day they died, they never took the oath to the United States, refused to take the oath. And so I think that, those scars stayed around for a long time.
Well, now tell us, the book I know you're working on right now, do you have an idea of when you'll have it completed and where folks can start looking for it?
I think that I'm going to have to draw a line in the sand.
Because
every time I think, okay, I have enough stories, well, then again, I'll find another diary. Matter of fact, I've had some folks up in Athens call me. They have an original diary that's never been published before that I'm going to have a shot at it. So I'm really excited about that. But I think about the 1st of February, I'm going to start making the index and go from there. And I'm hoping to have it published by April.
Terrific.
And I'll be doing, I'm sure, book signings here locally.
Oh, absolutely.
And if anyone out there listening that has Confederate relatives, and even if they didn't live exactly in Bradley County, especially if it's a good story, I'd love to have a picture of them and know their story. And they can always contact me. Well, they can call me at 472-5256, and that's my home number. And no one ever answers that phone, so please leave a message and somebody will get back with you. But I would like to have more local stories. And during the break, I was flipping through the books. You see, I've got a lot of great pictures.
She's got a lot of great pictures, and it is so interesting. It always is, and then you take a hike, for a while you don't read something about it, but when you get started in it, and I know that you have a great way of making things interesting, so I can't wait, guys. So we'll have something to look forward to for our springtime reading.